present our panel for today's session. We have the session called Private Delhi. We have Mr. Ashwin Sanghi in conversation with Ashok Ferrey. This session is presented by the Patrika Game Changes series. There will also be a slot for question and answers at the end of the session, so please hold on to your questions, which the moderator will point out who the questions will be asked to. So please do not ask questions out of turn. And we have both Ashwin and Ashok available at the book signing tent at the end of the session to do the book signing. Thank you.
Is this working? A very good afternoon to you all. We're here with Mr. Ashwin Sanghi, who needs no introduction to anybody here. And we're here to talk about this book, Private Delhi. Ashwin, tell me, it's an extraordinary book. I mean, you have these very short, sharp chapters. They're like staccato bursts of, it's like gunfire almost.
Well, you know, Ashok, can everyone hear me at the back? Yeah, comfortable, wonderful. What I've realized is that one of the huge issues with reading in general these days is the attention span. Human attention span is not what it used to be. They did a study to find out that in the 1950s, what was the average shot length of a movie? And they found that it was about somewhere in the vicinity of 10 seconds. That same number today is about 5 seconds, so it's half.
Half.
In the year 2000 or so, the average attention span of a human being was somewhere in the vicinity of about 12 odd seconds. Today, it is down to about 8 seconds. And which means also that, I mean, what's even scarier is that a goldfish has 9 seconds. So in that sense, we are better off writing for goldfish. But the point being that you need to figure out a way to get a person to turn the page. And one of the ways of doing that is by keeping the chapters very, very short. And I think that's a trademark now, both of James Patterson as well as me, that keep the chapters very short and make sure that they're crisp, they're explosive, and that they end with a hook so that you have to turn the page.
And it gives it's like a very short, sharp rhythm to the whole book.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Would you like to give us just a little short, sharp burst before we start?
Sure. Should I read out a small passage? Yeah? Okay. So we'll just read the first page probably. Yeah? And maybe just So, the killer emptied the final bag of ice into the bath and shut off the cold tap. With the tub full, he stood back to admire his handiwork, watching his breath bloom. Winter in Delhi, it was cold, but the temperature in the small bathroom was even lower than outside and falling fast, just the way he wanted it. From outside came the sound of footsteps on the stairs, and the killer moved quickly. His victim was early, but that was fine. He was prepared. And in a heartbeat, he left the bathroom and crossed the front room of the apartment, scooping his hypodermic syringe from a table as he passed. A scratching sound announced the key in the lock, and the victim opened the door. The killer attacked from behind, grabbing the victim, pulling him into the room, and smothering a cry of surprise with one gloved hand. He used the syringe, and for a second the victim struggled and then went limp. The killer let him drop to the carpet, checked the corridor outside, and then kicked the door shut. He bent to the victim and began to undress him. 10 minutes later, the victim awoke, naked and gasping in the bath. The bathroom light was off, and his eyes hadn't yet adjusted to the gloom. But he heard the clicking of the ice cubes, and he knew instantly where he was. His arms had been hoisted overhead, handcuffed to the taps, submerged in the ice. His feet and knees were bound. As he began to struggle, he heard someone enter the room, and then a gloved hand pushed his head beneath the cubes. He inhaled the icy water, feeling his airways fill and his heart constrict with the shock of the sudden cold. When the hand allowed him back to the surface, his coughs and sputters were punctuated by the violent chattering of his teeth. The figure loomed over him, a shadow in the darkened bathroom. You'll feel it in your toes and fingertips first, he said. Tingling, then numbness. That's your body redirecting resources to protect the vital organs. Clever thing, the body. It can adapt quickly. If you were an Inuit, an Aborigine, even a Tibetan Buddhist monk, then withstanding this kind of cold would be simple for you. But you're not those things. The killer moved into view. In his hand was the victim's name badge taken from his shirt. Rahul, he read, and then tossed it into the bath. Oh, I do apologize. I'm sure you know all the effects of cold on the human body. You know all about the slow shutting down of the various functions, how the brain dies before the heart. Who are you? Managed Rahul. He squinted. Do I know you? The attacker's voice was familiar somehow. I don't know, said the attacker. Do you? He perched on the edge of the bath, and Rahul could see that he wore all black, including a black baklava. Then, opaque surgical gloves seemed to shine dully in the room, giving him the appearance of an evil mime. You're wondering why I'm here, said the man, as though reading his thoughts. He smiled and removed from his pocket a tiny little tool that he showed to Rahul. Are you familiar with a procedure called enucleation? For those who are unfamiliar, enucleation is the removal of the eye. So that's the first chapter. So in case it caught your attention and fancy, please do buy one.
I mean, if that opening chapter isn't a page turner, I don't know what is. You know, is there anything you don't know about enucleation and all the other medical procedures that go on?
It's difficult to write for James Patterson and not get one's hands dirty with a lot of this stuff.
There's a huge amount of research, really, must have gone
tons.
into this.
I mean, and some of it is actually rather sickening, Ashok. For example, I hadn't ever visited a morgue. In India, that is. In fact, anywhere in the world. But when I wrote Private India, I went to a morgue in Bombay. And this time when I was doing Delhi, I had to do the same in Delhi. Similarly, for example, I didn't know the first thing about the organ transplant market. That was something which was completely alien.
And there is one?
There is one. And it's a scary place. In fact, most of the people in that transplant market were not willing to talk to me. It was only through one of my contacts in the police force that I was able to access a tout. And that tout was then able to actually sit with me, of course, on the assumption that it would be anonymous. So I actually got to know what is the price of a liver, what is the price of a heart.
So this is the man to come to if you need a liver.
So yeah, that happened. And of course, there was also the entire focus on medical malpractice. And how does that actually operate? And what goes on inside typical government-run hospitals? For me, honestly speaking, it was an eye-opener.
And it's very interesting to me coming from Sri Lanka because just last month, they uncovered a whole medical ring of both Indian and Sri Lankan doctors who are in this, and the patients fly across and the organs are harvested in Sri Lanka.
I've always believed, Ashok, that if you really think about it, we as fiction writers, frankly, when I had just started out as a writer, some press wallas used to ask me, you're a businessman. And as a businessman, your training, my training, for example, is not in creative writing, it's an MBA in finance. So, what is your qualification to write one of these books? And I said, well, through my growing up years, my mother always used to tell me that I was a damn good liar. So I can tell a lie quite well, and which is pretty much what we do as writers. But there is also the old proverb which says that if you are going to tell a lie, then tell that lie as close to the truth as possible, because it makes the lie that much more believable. And that's pretty much what research allows you to achieve.
Absolutely.
That, it sounds real, and therefore it sounds that much
It
more
sounds
believable.
more credible.
Yeah.
Yeah. But why are we so fascinated with death and murder and these particularly esoteric ways of murder that you describe in this book? What is it in us?
Well, I mean, think about it. I mean, serial killers across the world account for less than 1% of crime. I mean, but if you look at crime fiction, probably they account for more than 70% of crime fiction. I guess there's something evil lurking in all of us, and it terrifies us.
So we're all potential serial killers.
We are all
you're saying?
potential serial killers. And the fact that we could be that way is what sort of, in some ways, also repels us, but it also attracts us.
And here again, you've got to make those characters quite credible so that
Absolutely.
you're pushing them to that limit and you know that they might do that.
Absolutely.
How do you get your characters there again? Because they are very credible, and what you've done is each of those characters has a sort of a separate storyline running through.
Yeah.
There's the lady whose husband has died. There
Yeah.
are so many different other storylines.
Yeah.
Is that what contributes to
I think so, because the way that James Patterson and I like to work is normally we will start with a plot outline. And the plot outline tends to be exceptionally detailed. For example, for Private Delhi, our plot outline ran into this book is about 70,000 words, but the outline ran into about 10,000 words.
Gosh.
So almost every chapter, with every hook, every turn, every twist, has already been plotted in right there. And that makes a huge difference because it allows you to actually figure out where can you throw in the suspense and the surprise. I find that a lot of thrillers will either concentrate only on suspense or only on surprise. And balancing the two seems to be really the critical element. A lot of people ask me, suspense, surprise, they're the same. They're not. Because if you and I are up on stage, and then there is someone who is planning to assassinate us, and we know that this person is in the room, is lurking somewhere, that's suspense. But on the other hand, if we don't know that, and suddenly either you or I, hopefully you, not me, get shot, in that case...
This is my role in life.
In that case, Ashok, that's surprise. So getting that perfect balance of surprise and suspense is really what that plot enables you to achieve.
And when you structure this out, I mean, how do you work with James Patterson? Do you sit down together, or do you do it on email, or how does it really work? How are the dynamics?
This is our second outing together.
Yes.
We did Private India together, which was a little more complicated because we were working together for the first time. This time around, it actually started. Normally, all over the world, what James does is typically he develops a 30 or a 40-page outline, and then he asks his co-author to actually write the first draft of the manuscript. Now, one of the reasons for me to come into the picture is because India is alien to the average Westerner.
To a Westerner.
So to that extent, I mean, it's for example, if you had read Private India, it has lots of elements of mythology in it. Or for example, out here, the way that a typical government office would work, or what are the, for example, the street lingo. So all of that comes in as a result of me. So the way we work here is that I write the plot outline, and then I write the first draft. The second draft and the third draft are written by James. Now, everyone would think that, well, what happens between the first draft and the second draft? That's where really the James Patterson magic comes in. Because I think he is truly one person who has mastered the art of being able to get you to turn the page. So he is able to apply those principles which have worked for him on so many successful books.
But for me, the delight here is the fact that it's set in Delhi and it moves from one location in Delhi to another. And for an outsider like me, a Sri Lankan, it's sheer delight to read those.
Thank you.
Yeah. So obviously there is a hell of a lot more in it of you than you.
I would imagine
you
so, because the whole
take credit
point
for.
of collaborating with me is to make sure that there is a stronger India element in the story.
And in terms of audience, I mean, are our audiences receptive to the fact that it's written here and it's placed here in Delhi?
I think so. We had a great response to Private India, but I think we still, I mean, as a country, we still do not treat thrillers the same way that we treat a lot of other genres.
Yes, as I said before, there's a sort of very modern-day Raymond Chandler sound to your book.
There is, but I mean, the point I'm making is that if you just walk into, let's say, a typical bookstore at the airport, let's say in London or New York, you'll find that the top 5 or the top 7 are typically crime thrillers. The same when you walk into, let's say, an Indian bookstore, you'll find that the top 5 or 10 are typically romance, mythology, and so on and so forth. So crime thrillers come a little way down the line, but they are catching on very fast.
Is this because there are so few of them written here?
I would say that probably, and I think the fact that there haven't been that many Indian writers of crime thrillers. We always had a great tradition in terms of detective writing. So, for example, we had Satyajit Ray doing the Feluda series, and we had, for example, the character Byomkesh Bakshi, and so many others. So, detective novels per se have happened, even though somewhere along the way we lost our way and we suddenly became pundits. We became Brahmins in that sense. We were the upper castes, and we were expected to win Booker Awards. We were expected to only be doing highbrow writing. Whereas, frankly, the reason you read a book is to be entertained.
Absolutely, absolutely.
You know, so that entertaining factor somewhere went along the way.
Just vanished.
It vanished. By now, frankly, we should have had our own Miss Marples and our own Hercule Poirots and our own Sherlock Holmes, and we should have had various types of crime writing in place. But what I'm happy about is that a bunch of young authors have been coming into the space. So, for example, there is a wonderful a book called Brutal, written by Uday Satpathy. There is a whole Stranger series written by Novonil Chakrabarti. So there are many people who are being attracted to this space, and that will probably have a sort of a Rolling Stone effect.
And there needs to be this critical mass of writing in
Exactly.
a particular genre.
Exactly.
But what is curious is that the Miss Marples and the Hercule Poirots of the 20s
Yes.
then become classics by the time.
Absolutely.
So will the same happen with these books that you know, if they have a sort of relevance as people keep reading?
You know, even when we looked at the Miss Marples and the Hercule Poirots, the fact of the matter is that we were reading them for the thrills. There was
Absolutely.
always someone lurking around the corner. There are people who ask me, you know, when was the first thriller ever written? I said probably it would go back to 1697. So they say, which one? I say Little Red Riding Hood. So think about it. Here you have this little girl dressed in red walking along a very lonely pathway inside the forest. Suspense. Then she meets this big bad wolf, and you know that this is a bad person, and his motives are evil. Again, that's when you again have more suspense. And then he says, well, why don't you go and pick some flowers? And he's running off to the grandmother's house where the wolf is getting under the covers preparing. And then she walks in. And then suddenly the wolf eats her up, and that's the surprise element. So, I mean, it's been there all along. It's just that we called it a fairy tale. And that's no wonder that our children grow up the way they do. We fed them horror stories all along.
Well, now we have Ashwin Singh's books, you know. How long, I mean, you briefly dealt with it before, how long does it take for you to write this collaborative novel?
Well, you know, the way I like to think about it is that probably it takes a little longer than doing a solo effort. And the reason is because of the fact that this back and forth happens between two authors.
Do you guys disagree at any
Oh,
point?
yes, absolutely. So, for example, you know, I mean, there will be times when, for example, we may disagree even on the choice of a name.
Really?
Because a particular name that Patterson has chosen tends to mean something else in this country.
Exactly.
So, as a result of which there often tends to be that disagreement. Furthermore, you know, I think James Patterson's approach has always been that less is more. So he's a bit of a minimalist at heart, almost Zen Buddhist, if you like. So if you could convey everything within 60 or 70,000 words, then that's a perfect thriller. Whereas I'm used to writing books which are typically 120,000 to 150,000 words long. In that sense, if you look at it in architectural terms, I'm probably Rambagh Palace or Umaid Bhavan, whereas he's probably a Buddhist monastery. So to try and get those two things together is very difficult.
But you do succeed. And does it take sort of a year? Does it take 6 months? Does it take how
Typically,
long?
like for example, Private Delhi has been a little less than a year. This was because of the fact that it was the second time round. Private India had gone into almost 18 months.
And are we going to get lots of other privates?
Well, that is yet to be decided. We have we have one character in Private, a guy called Santosh Wagh, who is the main investigator.
The
and
protagonist.
Santosh, I mean, I genuinely believe that his brooding nature lends himself, that character lends itself to being exploited in more than one story.
It's a deep character, isn't
Yeah,
it?
yeah,
It's
absolutely.
a very sort of,
Absolutely.
dark and deep.
So where we had ended off Private India was Santosh Wagh having solved the case and having landed up in hospital, come out of hospital. And then, of course, Santosh is a drunk. He loves his Johnny Walker Black Label. And so that bottle is lying in front of him, and his boss, Jack Morgan, comes along, and he says, well, are you going to have that? And we left off Santosh Wagh deciding whether it was Johnny or Jack. That's where we'd left the story. And then, of course, Private Delhi tells you that he did choose Jack over Johnny.
The other delight about this book is that it's very cinematic. You can picture these scenes,
Yeah.
and quite a lot of them are in these very dark rooms
Yeah.
and whatever.
Yeah.
Have you been approached for a film on these?
I've been approached for a ton of films on a ton of books. None of them have got made.
So here's your chance.
And no, I remember attending a talk by the famous Wilbur Smith.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And I went up to him and I said, for every book of mine, I have probably ended up optioning it once, twice, etc. He said, stop worrying, because none of my books also made it into films, but I made a ton more money by simply optioning the same book over and over again. So
It's a cunning plan, you see, it's
I
a
take
cunning plan.
consolation from the fact that I get to option the same book several times over.
And is the length of options of like 1 year or 2 years?
Yeah,
or-
typically.
Yeah. So we look forward to that. It's a very, very short session, so I may throw it open to questions now. If you just raise your hands and see, my gosh, yes, this is what I thought. If we could have a mic, please, to this guy who's standing up. We'll start then. We'll work our way around the room.
Thank you, Ashwin, for commentary on Private Delhi. The series is becoming too famous, but I have read your early, very much close to our own ethos. Which books you are working on, or they are just waiting for the private?
No. My style of working has slightly undergone a change in the sense that I have 3 standalone series which I'm working on at any given point of time. So obviously the most famous in that is the Bharat series, which started with the Rosabal line, went on to Chanakya's chant, went on to the Krishna key, and eventually the Sialkot saga in 2016. So the Bharat series is very much my first love in that sense. So I already have a story idea in mind for the next book in the Bharat series. So currently I'm at the plotting stage for the Bharat series. And of course, the second part of the series is Private, on which we've done 2 books. Let's see whether a third or a fourth emerge. And then, of course, I also do my non-fiction series, which is 13 Steps. So 2 books have come there, but currently there are 3 or 4 in the pipeline. So in that sense, I've had to teach myself to multitask and do many more projects simultaneously.
There's a question, girl in red there.
Riding Hood.
Hi, Ashwin sir. It was
Hi.
such a delight listening to you.
Thank you.
So my question is that what fascinates you so much about Krishna that you wrote a book on him? Like,
Okay. I think for me, Krishna is one of those amazingly, what is called the almost dokla, almost dualistic, where you see multiple dimensions of the same character, and you can't really figure out whether this is a good guy or a bad guy. So for example, on the one hand, you have someone who is so fiercely protective towards the Pandavas and particularly Draupadi. On the other hand, you have someone who does not blink an eyelid in terms of saying, hey, listen, Ashwatthama is dead. So every possible chal, every possible deceit has been used by him. And I think that is what I think propelled me not only to write the Krishna Key, but probably also propelled me to write Chanakya's chant, because Chanakya is a similar character, where to a very great extent, what you do is not necessarily positive or negative. It is the intent which makes it positive or negative. So that's really where I'm coming from.
Now, before we go to the next question, I would like to ask a question on behalf of Raja Sabharwal, who was the winner of the Patrika Game Changer series. They had a quiz,
Okay,
a contest.
congratulations, Rajat.
And the question is, what inspired you to write Chanakya's chant?
I was sitting in Delhi airport, and I think this was 2009, elections had just happened. And it had been almost about 10 days, and a cabinet formation had not happened. And I thought to myself, I said, this politics of our country is so messy. Was it always so messy? What was the case, let's say, 2,000 years ago, or 2,500 years ago? And then, of course, there is this wonderful little thought by Sun Tzu, who says that politics is simply war without bloodshed. And so, to that extent, if you were looking back in time, 2,300 years ago, people settled their disputes by going to war. Today, they simply do it by bringing down governments. But the essential nature of human beings has not changed. There is the old joke which says that the word politics comes from two distinct words, poly, which in Latin obviously means many, and ticks, which means blood-sucking creatures. And that's the fundamental nature of politics everywhere.
Brilliant, brilliant.
So I wanted to bring that out.
We've got time for a couple more questions. There's a lady at the back there, and then we'll come over here. There's a lady there. Yes, and over here. We'll get to you. We've just enough time.
Hi, Ashwin.
Hi.
I think it's a great honor working with James Patterson. I just wanted to know, how did you landed having a collaboration with him?
Okay, actually, one of my very good friends who works at the same publishing house which represents James Patterson, she was actually transferred from India to London. And in that London office, she was sitting right next to the person who manages James Patterson. Now, in India, we have a concept which is known as arranged marriage, where two aunties sit together in a room and they fix up the relationship between a boy and a girl without the boy and girl ever having met. So this was a typical arranged marriage where the two agents sat together and they said, why don't we try and make this work? So, yeah.
There you are. There's a question here.
Ashwin, today morning I heard Richard Flanagan, and he said that he never plots his stories, and it is more of an instinctive process for him.
Yeah.
Now, in your case, you and James Patterson, you said that you have a very
Structured process.
Very structured process. So, is it more to do with the genre that both of you represent, or is it individual author-wise? I'm asking because I'm a writer myself, and I write in the same genre as you do.
Yeah.
So
I think that's a good question. I genuinely believe that crime writing, not writing in general, crime writing, I believe is much more of a craft than it is an art. So in other words, the way a craftsman who, let's say, makes, for example, chairs or tables, the first table won't be as good as the 10th, and the 10th won't be as good as the 100th. So as you hone your skill, your craftsmanship actually improves. Whereas on the other hand, with art, it's all about inspiration. So where that inspiration takes you is what is important. So in fact, many would say that don't hone your skill, because then you will tend to become repetitive. You'll end up losing that inspirational streak. But I genuinely feel that when you look at a very complicated plot structure, where there are multiple, I mean, the whole idea of a crime thriller is to be looking around, to be looking over your shoulder and figuring out who done it. And if that is the case, then you do need to have a roadmap, I mean, think about it. If you were going, let's say from Jaipur, and you were traveling all the way down to Bombay, and if you needed to traverse that entire distance, would you do it without a map? So I think that plot outline and that structured working is really your map. It's your GPS, which keeps you in check. Thank you.
There's a question here.
Hi.
I just freaked out, so I just wrote my question away.
Sure, that's very organized of you, I must say.
Thank you. So, just talking about that lie. So, what is more appropriate to think? Is it like in a lie, convincing yourself that the lie you are thinking to lie must approach to truth?
Sorry, you know your mic is
Yeah, I'm
breaking
sorry.
in between. Could you just repeat it a little slowly?
Sure.
I will catch on it.
So, hello, what is more appropriate to think? Living within a lie or convincing yourself that lie you are thinking to lie is approaching towards truth? I'm sorry, that's just
Wow. Wow. Okay. I think somewhere along the way, if you are going to be telling a story, I did catch an element of what your question was. I lost you somewhere along the way, but I think the question was in terms of whether you need to convince yourself about a lie, and I think to a certain extent with what I have found with my writing process is that when I'm working on a book, at that point of time, I tend to lose myself in that story. One of the reasons I became a storyteller, and I must tell you I'm using that word particularly storyteller, I'm not using the word writer, because writers are more concerned with words, storytellers are more concerned with stories. So the only question that at that time is in my mind is that will it hold your attention? I like to think of a storytelling process as 10 or 15 people sitting in a circle around me, and I'm telling them a story. And I'm not writing it, I'm telling them that story. And the thought is that I think it was the great Alfred Hitchcock who said that the ideal length of a movie is related to the endurance of the human bladder. So you, at some point of time, need to get up and take a break. Now imagine if there are 3 people in that circle who desperately need to get up and use the loo. But they don't, because that story is so exciting. Now, how do I make it so exciting? By first convincing myself of that lie. Only then. If I'm not convinced, I'll not be able to tell you a convincing lie. So I hope that answers your question.
There's a question behind you, the guy with both hands up. He's been waiting a long time.
Thank you. My question to you is, sir, that I started reading crime with the Hercule Poirot, as it is pronounced. And then I moved on to Novoneil Chakraborty. I read X. And now I have moved on to Vince Flynn, the Mitch Rapp series. Sir, I believe that as long as there is no one as a CIA agent as Mitch Rapp, I do not get intrigued by the story. So, sir, where does the thing that lacks in a story that does not involve a protagonist? So that is my question to you. The second question is that, sir, where do Indian people lack that intellect? If you think that the Indian people lack that intellect, that they do not read crime as much as love. Is love more relatable than crime, or is it... What is
that? There's very little to distinguish between love and crime. Trust me, I've been married 18 years. But the point being that I think to a certain extent we are on that path of evolution, as it were. And that is not to say that we are going to a better place. I think it's great that youngsters are reading more of romance and are reading more of mythology. But I don't think that is the end of the story. I think the story is still evolving as we go along. Second, to answer your question related to protagonists, I mean, frankly, you can't have any crime thriller without a protagonist. Somewhere the protagonist is there, even though it may not be apparent in every way. But there is someone in a story that you will root for. And that rooting for process. So for example, the fact that in Private Delhi, you have someone like Santosh Wagh, who is frankly a broken man. He's got a problem with alcohol addiction. He walks with a limp, even though he doesn't need to walk with a limp. He, every few days, wants to actually ditch the Alcoholics Anonymous meeting that he needs to go for. His relationships are totally screwed up. Now, the fact that he has all of that going on in his life almost makes you feel pity for him. And it is that pity which then makes you root for him. So I think every story has to have that sort of a central character somewhere or the other. It may not be in complete prominence, but it will be there somewhere. Yeah.
Okay, we haven't had anyone from this side, so let's go with this girl here.
So you've written Rothable Line and
Yes.
Krishna Ki as well as Chanakya's Chant,
Sure.
and all of these have very strong mythological themes.
Yeah.
So my question to you is, when you're writing books like these, is it the contemporary plot that comes first or the mythology that comes first?
Very good question. I would say that probably to a very great extent there is a kernel of an idea. So that is the starting point. If in a more humorous note, I would say that the inspiration usually starts with whiskey, because at that point of time the mind has been opened up, and you're allowing a free flow of ideas to happen. But at some point of time, sobriety needs to take over. And in that sense, I would say that probably if I look at something like, let's say, Chanakya's Chant, it happened on a whim about politics. Krishna Ki, I was actually at a cocktail party, and someone said, have you heard about an avatar of Vishnu which is yet to come? And at that point of time, I hadn't heard about Kalki. I frankly hadn't heard about Kalki. And the next day, I was in such a rush to try and lay my hands on a copy of the Kalki Puran. And I was able to get a copy of the Kalki Puran, which I read. That became the basis for the Krishna Ki. The Rosabal line was, I think I keep trying to explain this to my audience that, listen, you will not go out actually looking for an idea. That idea will normally look for you. Typically, for example, when I was in Srinagar, 2002, at that point of time, I went into this tomb in the center of town. And it's a famous tomb. It's been there for since 112 AD, 2,000 odd years. There are property records going back all the way. And there is a Muslim saint buried there from the 14th century. It's an Islamic burial with the head pointing towards Mecca. But there is a second body underneath the first body. And that second body is a Jewish burial because it's an east-west burial of ancient times. And outside the tomb is a pair of feet. And the feet has little cross marks indicating where nails would have been driven in for a crucifixion. And so the popular sort of mythology around the place is that it's the final resting place of Jesus Christ. So that story, I don't know what it was, but I went there, and then that story came to me. So that's pretty much the way it has been with most of my books. I have not gone out looking for those stories.
Got time for just one more. Maybe this girl.
Hi, Ashwin
Hi.
and Ashok. Thanks so much for the engaging.
Thank you.
I think a lot of us, the concept of collaborative writing, intriguing. Could you please tell us one thing you love about collaborative writing, and one thing you prefer while you write alone?
Sure. I think with collaborations, it's like saying that can you produce a harmony by singing solo? So the only way that you can actually produce a harmony is by having more than one voice. So to that extent, it's a beautiful combination of several dimensions. And so you can sing at different octaves. And in that sense, you can produce a harmony. But obviously, singing like that requires a lot more discipline. So if you're singing on your own, then it doesn't really matter as to what variations you make along the way. Whereas even in a jugalbandhi, you will have to keep an eye on your partner in terms of, am I going in the right direction? And so to a certain extent, it can feel inhibiting. So it's like with anything else in life, there is a plus and a minus.
Ladies and gentlemen, Ashwin Sanghi.